Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar today to go over everything about orders. So the plan is we'll essentially work from right to left. So we'll look at the get orders integrations from your sales channels. We'll look at shipping mapping rules and setting those up with policies and mapping those out to source shipping methods. We'll also look at order import rules and go over a few common rules and how to set those up. That'll probably help you out in the long run. We'll also take a look at order routing rules and how to set those priorities and make sure that your orders are being routed to the proper suppliers when they have the same products between multiple suppliers. And then we'll also look at the outbound integration for sending POs to your sources and getting those set up. At any point in this, if you have any questions, feel free to pop into the QA option on Zoom here, post your question in there, and I'll take a look at it and get to it. And if anything else doesn't seem clear, or if you need a little bit more depth or information on any topic I'm talking about, feel free to post that in the Q&A as well, and I'll get to that. All right. So to get started, we'll take a look at the right-hand side of the integrations and look at getting orders, which is the import of orders in the Flxpoint from your sales channel. So to look at that, we'll go over to our channels tab and then take a look. I have a test Shopify store set up here, and the get orders, this is going to be the integration that we'll be looking at today. So if I go into the settings, look at integrations and go into the configure get orders. Here's where you'll choose the type of integration we're doing. 99% of the time, this is going to match the same channel as we're doing the syncs and the product updates, because that'll be the channel we're importing the orders from. Then you'll have your connection settings here, which would be very similar to the same connection settings that you set up for any of the other integrations for that channel. So if you've already had this set up on a sync products or a published products integration, the same connection can just be used here. And then here's where we start getting into some decisions that we'll need to make when we're importing the orders. So the first option here is how long do we store personal identifying information? So with personal information and privacy being a top priority these days, we do give you an option here on how long this personal information will be stored on the orders in Flxpoint. So you can set this here that, after shipment, do we delete it after 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or just hold it indefinitely? So you can just select this whenever you're setting it up to follow whatever policy you'd like to keep. Or a lot of times marketplaces like Amazon has their own policy for storing that. So to be in compliance with them, you'll just want to match their own storage policy. They must have an option here on getting orders that have been updated within the last certain amount of days. So typically whenever we're running the get integrations or get orders integration, we will look within this time period for any new orders that have been moved into a status that we're looking to import here. So it would match this financial status and fulfillment status. So that way we're making sure we're importing orders within a certain time frame, making sure we're getting those imported. And then also another benefit of this is, while we don't always leave it as kind of an unlimited, is that just takes time, right? That's more API calls that we'll be running. So the get orders will take a little bit while longer to run. So as a default, we always recommend with 7 days or maybe 14 days, depending on what process you have on modifying orders or getting them into a status that they're ready to be fulfilled and shipped. And then the other options here are the financial status and fulfillment status. So these are statuses that we look at to say, yep, this order is ready to be imported for fulfillment. So very typically, we're looking at orders that are in a paid status and have an unfulfilled fulfillment status. But you can modify these depending on your workflows on your channels, and maybe you are modifying some orders or doing some work directly on your channel before you're ready to fulfill it. So it's making sure this lines up with the statuses that you're expecting orders to be imported into Flxpoint and then processed out to your suppliers for fulfillment. And then under the advanced settings, depending on which channel you're working with, there are some different settings that may apply to you here. Such as for Shopify, once we import an order, we can actually upload a tag back to Shopify for that order. So a lot of times people might put, Flxpoint here just to know that Flxpoint has imported the order. So if they go to their Shopify store, they'll be able to see that and say, yep, Flxpoint has imported this order. It's not required. It's just an additional setting that you can use whenever you'd like. And then going on to the mapping templates, if you are using one of our main platforms that we currently support, such as Shopify, BigCommerce, WooCommerce, Amazon, a lot of times the default templates that we create are perfectly fine to use, but it's always a good idea just to take a look at it. So if we take a look here, we're mapping the billing address to billing address line 1 and so on. So again, for a lot of these channels that we support, a lot of these default mapping templates will work just fine. But it's always a good idea, again, just take a look at it and make sure everything lines up how you'd expect. But I know for Shopify, this one's pretty good to go for importing everything here. Oh, we had a question come in. Can orders be exported at routine intervals to a flat file and then deleted? So that would kind of have to do with an outbound option. So we would import orders into Flxpoint, and then we could set it to export a file to an FTP or via email. So that is an option. But then deleted, not sure what you mean by that, but typically when orders import in Flxpoint, we'll keep that record in Flxpoint indefinitely. So essentially once they would be sent on the send PO integration, they would be marked as awaiting fulfillment, or we can do some other workflows that, if that's your use case, where we just mark them as closed once they get exported. So there are some options there, and I'll show you a few more export options when we get to the orders page. So once you set up the mapping template and your integration is complete here, so we'll do save and complete. The next step would be to set this on a schedule. So typically we'll run get orders about every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes. So that way we're importing orders relatively quickly, getting those in. So that way you can get those processed sooner over to your suppliers to prevent any of those out of stocks or items selling out by the time that you get the order over to the supplier. So once we set that up, the next thing we'll want to look at is shipping mappings for the channel. So that's essentially saying whatever shipping method is selected on checkout, we need to tell Flxpoint how to map that in internally, so that way we can map that out over to the supplier or source shipping methods. That way when we generate that PO and pick the source it's going to be going to, that they get the proper method based on that mapping. So to set up the shipping mapping, the first thing you have to do is create a policy. So to do that, we will go into settings, then orders, and then shipping policies. And I already have a few created here, but I'll just go ahead and add a new one. Maybe this will be value shipping, be our cheap option here. So we'll go ahead and save that. That's all you have to do on the shipping policy side, because the shipping policy is a container of your channel methods mapped into one of these policies. And then on the supplier side, the supplier methods get mapped into the policy as well. So it's kind of mapped in from either side of it into the policy in the middle. So once you have a policy created, we can go back to the channels, go to our channel, and we can create our shipping mappings here. So if we want to add a new one here, we'll hit the plus sign, and then the channel shipping text. This is going to be the method and essentially the exposed data for what method was selected on that order. Sometimes this just maps the methods that you have on your store. So let's just say on my Shopify store, I added a new value shipping method. So we can type that in there, and we'll map that to our value shipping policy and click save. And when you do that, if there are any current orders that have imported with that method that hasn't been mapped, this will actually tell you how many are going to be updated when you save that. Right now, I don't have any orders with that value shipping method, so no orders updated when I just saved that. Question came in regarding the sync times on the orders. Why not make get orders the shortest possible? You can, a lot of times these are API calls that get ran on these websites. So depending on how many orders are importing at a time, it may take a minute or two or several minutes to import depending on the amount of orders. So you would want to have it set, 10, 15, 30 minutes is usually pretty good. When we start getting into the 5-minute time, a lot of times we bump up against API rate limits and we may not complete that job within that 5-minute time frame. So that essentially would mean that just the job just continue. Once it's done, it would start again and refresh. So you may, it's always good to get it as short as possible, but sometimes it just isn't able to run every 5 minutes due to the amount of API calls that get made, the amount of orders, things like that. All right, so now we have our channel shipping method mapped to a policy. The final thing we'll want to do is when we're setting up a new policy and shipping method is telling Flxpoint, all right, for each source, how do I want that shipped if it goes this value policy? So let's take a look at our sources and let's use our US direct integration here and set up a shipping mapping. So here we can just put a description. I know US direct ships everything UPS ground. So we'll just throw that for a description here. And shipping code, we can use UPS ground. So the shipping code, if you are using inventory source integrated suppliers, you'll be working with our support team to map the shipping code internally on inventory source to map this to the proper method with the supplier. But if you're using any of the other outbound operations, maybe you're sending a CSV file to an FTP for the supplier. A lot of times they may not accept, say, like UPS ground on the order. A lot of times they say, if you're going to ship this UPS ground, put this code on the file in the shipping method that may be UPSG. Or if they do maybe FedEx value saver, something like that. Maybe it's FDX VS. So a lot of times your suppliers will tell you what they accept because just like us, they work on an automated system a lot of times where they're looking for specific codes or specific values in a column for their system to function properly. So a lot of times you can just map this code here. And when we get to the sends PO part of this webinar, I'll show you how we can map that in on the mapping template so that gets applied properly. So you can fill this out here. And then it'll give you a list of all your shipping policies here. And one thing to note is you can only map one supplier method to one policy. So I already have some policies mapped for the supplier. That's why they're grayed out here. So the only ones that aren't mapped right now are next day air and value. We'll select that. We can also take a look at the global method here. This is really used for when we get into rate shopping. For these, this will be rate shopping will be another webinar coming up because that's a kind of a big topic there to go through that process, and figure it'd be best to go through that all on its own. But the global method would be used there, and you can also put in custom carrier names, which can also be used on the outbound send PO operation. Maybe if they don't use a particular shipping code and we have to split a carrier name and method, that could be used as well. So if we save that, now we have a full shipping mapping created from the channel on the get orders. We have the channel shipping method mapped to the policy. And then we also have the source shipping method mapped into that policy as well. So that way, whenever we get an order from Shopify that has a value method and it's going to our US direct source, it knows to send this to as UPS ground. All right, any questions so far on this? Next topic I'll get into is the order import rules and how we can use that to streamline a bit of your processes there. All right, great. So order import rules. So we take a look at this in our settings and go to orders and importing. So this is where we can potentially put orders on hold or set up some custom email alerts where maybe you have a store that maybe you only ship to the lower 48 or you don't want to do any international orders. Maybe any orders over $500 or $1,000 you want to put on hold and review those, make sure it's not fraudulent or anything like that. This is what you can use the order import workflow rules to do. So we'll set up a rule here for maybe only doing US based shipments where we're not going to ship anything internationally. So we'll create a rule here. It'd be a conditional rule. So I'll name this non-US orders. And then we're going to use our if-then statements there. So what we can do if we're trying to not ship anything outside the US, we'll say if. And one thing to note here is this top section is going to be the billing address. But for this scenario, we're going to want to look at the shipping address, which lives down here. So we'll look at country code. We can say if country code equals US, or it could be USA. So we'll want to do an or. Say country code USA. Then we can do some other modifications here as well. But we can say in this scenario, order status. Let's put this on hold. I don't want to necessarily cancel it. Maybe you reach out to the supplier, maybe do some freight forwarding there, or make an exception for an international order. So this essentially holds the order. It won't process it until you take any action on the order. And another cool thing we can do is we can set this on hold, and then we can also generate a custom email to get sent to you as a Flxpoint user, which will be a custom alert that you can set up through our custom alerts here that maybe you create one for non-US orders that alerts you like, hey, this order imported, it's not going to the US, you need to take action on that. So you can use this to really fine tune your order workflow there. Then we can also say, maybe any high priced orders you want to do some manual verification on. So maybe hold orders over $1,000. So here we can say if the order total is greater than 1,000. Again, we can go down to order status, set to on hold, and then you can create another custom email notification to alert you of that as well. And to set up those custom notifications, that's under custom alerts here in settings. And just add your custom alert. So if we want to name this one non-US orders, event notification is available for use with. So this would be our order import workflow. And then if you've created an email connection, which again is here on our settings, you can have it use a specific email. And here's you just filling out the mapping for the order format. So if we say Flxpoint non-US order, so in this scenario, this is an email that'll be sent to you or your staff working on this. So that way they're alerted of that and can take action on that. So you can create this alert and then use that in those workflow rules. All right, had a few questions come in here. Isn't the shipping policy something we need to obtain from the source? We don't have that much discretion, especially with well-integrated providers. So in this instance, I believe you might be referencing a shipping policy on where or how they ship out items. And yes, that is something you would want to verify with the suppliers and make sure you have rules and shipping methods that match their own policy and methods. But internally in Flxpoint, when we talk about shipping policy, the shipping policy is a container of your channel methods. And then when that channel method comes in, how is the supplier going to ship that out? Because when an order comes in, and we'll get into this part in a second with the order routing, if you have multiple suppliers that have the same products, going through the order routing workflow, it determines which supplier is going to get that order. And then that way we will have multiple source or supplier shipping methods mapped to, say, that standard or value policy, whatever you name it, in Flxpoint. So that way, once that order comes in, we generate the PO, identify the source that's going to get the order. We can assign the proper shipping method based on that source method to policy mapping to determine which method that supplier is going to ship that out on. And then we had another question here about crypto payments, accepting those on channels. So that's totally fine. You know, the payment process for these channel integrations happen directly on your website. So right now, you know, typically everything that syncs through Flxpoint is going to mimic your source currency. So whether that's US dollars or euros, pounds, things like that. So when an order would import into Flxpoint that was purchased in crypto, it would display the US dollar or the currency equivalent of what you're using internally in Flxpoint. But that was a good question. I will reach out to our devs and see if there's maybe something we can do that if you are using a crypto on your website to accept payment, that we can show what value that was used on the order. All right, so let's get into order routing priorities. So this is a big one. So this again lives under settings and orders and then routing. So this, so I have a default routing group created here, but if you haven't had one set up, there'll be a create your first routing group here. Just click that and it'll open up to a screen like this. Give your order routing group a name and set it to as your default if you'd like to do that. And then going through this, there's some important decisions we want to make. So let's say after an order imports and we take a look at all of the routing priorities here, if it can't be routed, maybe there's no supplier that has it in stock or it doesn't fit one of these required priorities here. This option is, what do you want to do with the order? Do you want to place it on hold or automatically cancel it? Most folks want to just place it on hold so that way they can take a look at it, see why maybe it didn't route, and then make a determination there on how you want to move forward. And then also another thing here, input an email, whether that's your own email or maybe your staff that's using Flxpoint. Maybe there's a general email that everyone monitors. So if an order can't be routed and gets placed on hold, this will send a notification to that email so you can be alerted to that and take action on it. So getting into the details of it here. So the routing priorities, this really applies when you're using suppliers who, across those suppliers, they all may carry the same product, right? Because when we set up our sources and build those into the product catalog, we can identify the same item between suppliers, whether that's based on UPC or MPN or another identifier that they provide. So when that happens and we get an order for one of those items, we determine which one gets the order, right? So first thing that Flxpoint's going to do is going to see if both of those suppliers have it in stock, right? So that's the first thing that's going to check. If only one of them has it in stock, then that's going to be the supplier that gets the order. But if there are more than one suppliers or sources that can fulfill on that item, it's going to start taking a look at routing priorities here. So all these can be dragged and dropped to organize this based on the workflow rule. And it's going to take a look at these in a top-down manner. So a lot of folks, the biggest thing is they want to ship it out as the lowest cost. I want it to go to a supplier that's going to cost me the cheapest. So that means a bigger margin for me. So a lot of times we'll set the lowest cost as the top option here. And when you do this, we can say, set a margin percentage here, where maybe, I want to look at suppliers that, if it's within 5% difference of each other, right? If we leave that empty, if one supplier is a penny cheaper, they're going to win. So this is, if we set maybe a percentage margin within 5% of each other, if there's two suppliers who are the cheapest and they're within 5%, it's going to go to the next routing priority. So then a lot of times we'll set our preferred sources second, and our preferred sources lives down here below, where you can say, all right, I know US Direct in my warehouse are the top two suppliers I want to try to route orders to if they carry the same items. So if it's gonna try to find the lowest cost, and then if there's more than one supplier that has the lowest cost or within 5% of each other based on this margin, it's going to go to this list and go down it and try to fulfill it from there. Another useful priority here is single source, because a lot of times you'll be getting orders for multiple items that can then be fulfilled from multiple sources. So you can set this to be preferred or required. So if you set it as preferred, it's going to try to source all the items from a single source. That cuts down on shipping and drop ship fees if you're splitting it among multiple sources. So having it all lined up on one source, having them fulfill the entire order, it's definitely a useful function there. Now preferred, it's going to try to do that, but it won't fail out the order or fail out the order routing if it can't all be fulfilled from one source. But if you do want to require that, you'd set it to required, and we recommend you do set this as a top option if you are going to be requiring it. And if that does happen, and say you get an order that has multiple items and it all can't be fulfilled from one single source, it will put the order on hold based on the setting up here, because it can't be routed all to one source. And then you can go in, take a look at it, and then you can either manually create a PO to split that out that makes sense, or take another action on that and make a determination on how you'd like to actually process that order. And then the other option here is having a shipping policy mapped. Again, this using this as preferred or required. Essentially, this is kind of a good safety net, just making sure you have all your shipping methods mapped for your sources. So if you set this as required and there's not a shipping policy or method mapped for that channel shipping text, it won't route the order or send an empty value to the supplier, so that way they actually know how it can be shipped. And then closest margin, you can actually set this to take a look at the source address and compare it against the shipping address of the orders to hopefully cut down on shipping costs. So that way you're choosing the closest supplier to the customer that has it in stock, and cut down on shipping times because it'd be a closer distance. One other thing I'd like to point out here on the preferred sources is this enabled toggle. So by default, whenever you add a new source, they won't be enabled in order routing. So if you do add a new source, or you're just starting to get into orders and setting it up, you would want to enable any of your sources that you do want to have available to send orders to. Because I'll tell you, this happens to me sometimes when I go add a new source. It's easy to forget to come in here and enable it. But this is useful, if you're using some sources that are simply just a data aggregator, or some other use case that you may not be using them to actually submit orders to. So this is just a good way that they'll never be selected for the orders and erroneously route an order to them. We also have a suppress tracking option here. A lot of times this is useful if you're doing cross-docking or transfer orders, where maybe you're having the supplier ship an item to you, maybe you're throwing some other items in it at your warehouse and then shipping it out to the customer. So this is a way to prevent Flxpoint from syncing that tracking number, which is very likely the tracking number for that shipment to go to your warehouse, from being sent to the customer. So that way they're not getting a false tracking number or false notification there. Any questions so far? Oh, this is a good question. So essentially, the gist of this is they are using some workflows on the sync products or the published products to the channel to essentially artificially limit the quantity to the site, or maybe they don't want to show the total amount available, or somehow not showing the true quantity available from the supplier. They want to know, does the order routing rules take in effect the shown quantity on the channel or the true quantity from the source? So when we're looking at sources, we're always going to be looking at the true quantity from the source. So maybe if you're only showing 20 available on your website, and Flxpoint knows that between your sources or your single source that may have it, there's 40 available, the true quantity from the supplier is going to be what's taken into the account. All right, just clearing out some of these questions here that have come through. All right, so I'm going to ask, if the items don't have the same UPC at different suppliers, what is the solution? So that would be at the product building level, and making sure you are picking an identifier that is the same through those sources. So if it's not UPC, you can also use MPN, EAN, or ASIN, or there's also a custom field called reference identifier that if you know a common value between the two sources, you can map that on the get source inventory mapping template to use that as the reference identifier, and then we would match and build those products based on that reference identifier. All right, so we've gone through getting orders, we've gone through shipping mapping, we've taken a look at order import rules, we've set up our order routing, and now we will take a look at the last part of it, which is the send purchase orders operation to the sources. So this lives under our sources page, and then we'll take a look at my warehouse integration. So again, we'll take a look at our integrations, and this will be under the send POs. We click edit here. So a lot of times when setting this up, very typically most suppliers accept orders via an FTP. So we'll be posting a CSV file or XLS file to an FTP. We can also email orders. So we do have a few options here. We can also submit orders into your management systems like SKU Vault, or any of the other ones that we do integrate with. So I'll go through setting up an FTP CSV file, because that'll be the most kind of intensive one with the mapping, so we can look at the options here. So setting that up, you would choose your CSV XLS file for your integration type. And then I have a lot of test FTPs here, connections. So we'll do an FTP connection on this one. And setting this up, you would just fill this out with your FTP details, your host, username, port, and password. And we'll go to the next step here. So a lot of times the suppliers may have a file format name that they're looking for. A lot of times, maybe they need to timestamp that. So here you would put in the file name, and then you would include the .csv if it's a CSV file, or .xls if we're doing that format here. So you put that there. Then we also have a file name date format. So depending on how you formulate this, it will append it to the PO name when we actually generate the file. And then if we are sending it to an FTP, we just need to say what directory on that FTP we'll be submitting that order to. So in our test FTP, it's going to be on this orders directory. But again, you'll either get that information from the supplier, or if you're familiar with FileZilla, a lot of times it's once you take a look at the FTP, a lot of times it's pretty clear where they want that directory. They have an inbound or outbound folder, or they may even be more granular and have an orders folder and potentially a shipment tracking folder that will import shipments from. And if you don't know, always ask the supplier. They have a team of folks to help out with that, and they can usually give you some good information and get you in the right direction. Then you can choose the file format. And then since this is an outbound file, depending on the supplier needs, does it need to include headers, or should it just have raw data in it based on column position? So this just tells our system, should we include headers on the file or do it based off of an index position? Then we also have some advanced settings here, or maybe you only want to send purchase orders during a certain time frame that you're active on the account. So you can actually set this up to only send purchase orders on certain days and times. We can also hold orders for a certain amount of time before sending those. If maybe, for whatever reason you want a little bit of a delay. Typically that's not the case. You want to get orders over as quickly as possible. And then the rest of these really have to do with the file extensions and how we're generating the file. So if you need to modify that a bit to fit the format required from the supplier, you can use these here. And now mapping templates. We're always doing mapping templates here. So here's where we actually say what data is going to be on the file and in what position or under what header. So this is really for you to build out from default, because you'll be matching what the supplier requires for the order to import. So when you come to create this mapping template, you click add column. And then this left-hand side, these are all the data points that are available to send over to the supplier, the source on that purchase order file. So typically you're going to be including the purchase order number. And then we'll give the header name, so let's call it PO number. Then you'll be including all the shipping information. So again, there are two sections, which are the billing address and the shipping address. Usually only the suppliers care about the shipping information for the end customer. So just make sure when you're mapping this out, you do use the shipping address here. You fill this out with all that information. Also, they would need the order information or the line item information to know what items they're actually fulfilling. So you use this purchase order item here to include the SKU, the quantity ordered. You can also include the title or UPC if that's required by the source to include that information. And then we also have the shipping method. So remember when I was setting up those source shipping methods, we had a shipping code. So if the supplier only requires that shipping code, you can include that. Or if they do need a specific field for carrier and methods separately, you can set those up as separate columns here. So again, this kind of takes a little bit of work just to kind of map and make sure you're mapping everything how the supplier requires it to be a successful order import on their side. So once you have this mapped fully, we'll save the mapping template. We'll come back to our send purchase orders integration. Again, we can schedule this. So depending on the job here, if we're doing it to an FTP or sending an email, we can do every 10 or 15 minutes. Every 5 minutes usually would be fine on this one, because a lot of times we're not getting into APIs on this unless we're sending it to maybe a SKU vault or one of those other ones. So if it's anything outside of like a CSV to an FTP or an email, I'd recommend probably every 15 minutes. But that's something you can make a support call with our team, and we could take a look at your sync times and kind of make a decision there based on your specific account to see if we can fine tune that a little bit more for you. Great. So if you have any other questions on this, feel free to post those in. That's a good question. So a lot of folks leverage inventory source integrated suppliers, our sister company, where we generate and export of that data out of inventory source into Flxpoint. And then we'll also a lot of times leverage the order routing that had been pre-built on inventory source to submit those orders and route them to the supplier. So a question was asked, when we are using inventory source as a source, how should we set up the mapping? Actually, when you are using inventory source as a supplier and we're routing orders to them, there actually is no mapping to be done on there. Flxpoint and inventory source work together, and it's all kind of pre-built out through an API. So that'd be something during your onboarding that typically our support team, your implementation manager will work with you on. Which if we take a look at this supplier here under this API access, this is the token that's actually used and plugged in on your inventory source account to have that communication happen between Flxpoint and inventory source. And really how it's set up is you should never have to log into inventory source to manage anything. It can all be managed directly through Flxpoint. But just know there actually is no mapping for it because it's all predetermined. We know the values that inventory source needs. Inventory source knows what the value should be from Flxpoint. So that's all coded out and happens through our pre-built API. So there is no mapping, at least on the send PO job. You will have to set up a shipping mapping just like any other source. So that way, when it does get to inventory source, we know how to map that value over. That is definitely something our support team can walk you through if you are going through that setup process. All right. And then there was one question that came through on the form submission asking about unmanaged items on orders. So potentially this could be a scenario where you maybe have products on your website that we're not managing through Flxpoint. You don't have listings built for those, but they pre-exist on your website. What happens if Flxpoint imports an order that contains one of those items? So what will happen is we will mark that order as unmanaged. So when this comes in, you'll see this broken link, which essentially means that Flxpoint doesn't have a connection with that item on your website. There's no listing created for it that's been linked to your website. So we're not sure what to do with it. So by default, that order is going to import and it's going to be marked as unmanaged. And when items come in or an order comes in with items that are unmanaged, it's going to put it on hold because one, maybe that item shouldn't be unmanaged. Maybe you just haven't built an item for it, maybe forgot or need to. So you want to build a product, a channel listing for that and link it up to the existing item on your channel by running the link listings job from the channel listings page. And once you do that, you can click this relink item and it will take a look at that and it should create that connection there and change to a managed item. The other thing is maybe, you want to mark that item as not shippable here. So that way maybe it's a warranty or maybe it's not a physical item that you're shipping out. So you can come in and mark that as not shippable. And if there are other items on this order, you can then generate a purchase order. So it will not include this item on the order. On that same note, there is a setting in channels. We take a look at this and look at our settings page here that we flag unmanaged items as not shippable. So this would automatically do that where if an item imported, there was no link with the channel listings, meaning it's unmanaged, we'll automatically mark it as not shippable. So that way, if you are using any of the automated generation or auto processing aspects of it, that will still flow through automatically and disregard that unmanaged item. And on that same topic, we do have some options here for auto generating and auto processing the purchase orders. So to actually fully process an order to a supplier, there's two things that need to happen. We need to generate that PO once the order is imported from the channel. And that PO generation is what goes through the order routing rules that we discussed. So you have an option here on each channel. This is a channel level setting that when we import an order, should we automatically generate that purchase order? So if you flag this yes, whenever an order comes in, we're going to automatically import and then generate that purchase order, which will go through order routing. And then we have an option globally under our orders and our purchase order strategy here. Should we auto process the orders once it's been generated? So if you turn this on, Whenever an order imports, if it can be routed, goes through all the order routing rules, makes a decision, generates the purchase order, and then once this is turned on, it will automatically process that purchase order. So you don't have to take any action on it unless it gets put on hold or can't be fully routed to your suppliers. Now, maybe you don't want all sources to auto process. We would still want to leave the PO generation on at the channel level, and then we can turn this global setting off, and we have source specific settings as well. So if we go into our sources and look at our settings, under our purchase order strategy for those sources, we can override the global setting and say, auto process this order and disregard the global setting that says not auto process. Or you can do the inverse. You can turn auto processing on at the global level, and if there's a source or a handful that you don't want to auto process those, you can override the global setting here. All right. We had some questions about if an order does contain non-physical items like a cloud service or a warranty plan for it. Does it always get unmanaged, or can it be automated otherwise? That question has a few answers. It really depends how we're using the source data. So ideally, we would create some sort of flag on the source data for those items that we can then reference on the order import and say, this isn't a physical item. Always mark it as unmanaged, so that way the order can be fully routed for the physical items, which kind of answers this part two of the question. If the hardware is sold with a cloud service under a pack, how does it get interpreted? So a lot of times these packs, you're creating these bundles within Flxpoint. So that again would go back to, for that cloud service or that warranty service, marking that as an unshippable item. And then when Flxpoint imports that pack or that bundled item that you've created, it knows this is just a cloud item, a non-physical item, and then it also knows to fulfill out that physical item. All right, well, we're bumping up against the end of our time here. So if there's any other questions, definitely get them in. So I'll give you guys a few minutes here, or a minute here to get your other questions in. And while I'm waiting on those, I just want to point out here, in case anyone hasn't seen this or not aware of it, on all the, in your Flxpoint accounts, we have our Contact Us section here, which has a link to our system documentation, which is all of our help articles. You can submit a form question here to get an answer. And also down below, you can schedule calls. You can schedule a 10 or 25-minute call with our support team, or if you just have a quick question or need some quick help, you're like, hey, I can't figure this out, or have a quick question here, definitely feel free to schedule those. A lot of times you'll probably get me or someone else on our support team who could help you out pretty quickly there. And then if it is an issue that needs some escalation within our team, they'll be able to help get you out to the right person or get our devs involved so we can get that resolved quickly as possible. Oh, and then also for everyone here, the webinars, by the end of every week, moving forward, because we're doing this every Wednesday now, by Friday, we'll have the webinar posted on our YouTube channel and also on our webinar page at flxpoint.com. So that way you can see the webinar, review it, and go through it again whenever you're ready. So yeah, if you're not able to make any of our webinars, they'll always be posted by the end of the week that we host them on our YouTube site. All right, looks like there's no more questions. I really appreciate y'all joining us today. I hope this cleared things up for you, answered some of your questions, maybe demystified the whole order process for you. But again, if anything didn't make sense or you need some more insight on it, definitely shoot us an email or schedule a call, and we'll be able to provide some more one-on-one help with that. All right, hope you all have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next week.